There is a pervert hidden in this hole.
你要是个汉子，你就出来，是吧？你最起码你对你的下一代负责任。
He is the most difficult to capture murderer in Hebei. He is inherently evil. He killed 2 female neighbors on the spot with an iron rod and threatened to kill anyone he disliked. His actions terrified the entire village, causing all the residents to move away overnight. The police searched all over the country for 13 years, but who would have thought that he never left? For 13 years, he hid right under the police's noses, and the place where he was hiding shocked the officers. The story took place on August 8, 1998, in Dashigezwang, Sonha City, Hebei Province. A man named Fuji Li brutally beat his 2 female neighbors to death. The police officers who arrived at the scene were shocked by what they saw. 2 bodies were lying in the middle of the road in a chaotic manner. The scene was so gruesome that many villagers were brought to tears. The cause of death was very clear. Both individuals died from blunt force trauma to the head. The police have identified the murderer as Fuji Toshi, a 35-year-old man. He and his wife, Wang Qing, run a concrete precast factory at the entrance of their village. The Fuji family is considered one of the wealthiest in the village. There's an old saying, a virtuous wife is worth more than acres of fertile land. But this couple isn't exactly easy to deal with. Fuji Toshi is known for his impulsive behavior, while Wang Qing is quite the penny pincher. This morning, Wang Qing had an argument with his neighbor, Li, over drainage issues after the rain. Another female neighbor, Wu, tried to intervene and help, but this only infuriated Wang Qing further. He felt that the 2 women were ganging up on him. Wang Qing turned around and called her husband out of the house. Seeing his wife at a disadvantage, the hot-tempered Fuji Riji immediately picked up an iron rod over 1 meter long and 4 to 5 centimeters thick and started hitting. Fuji Li immediately knocked one person down. The other woman saw this and tried to run, but Fuji Li quickly caught up with her and struck her with the iron rod as well. Both female neighbors died on the spot. In just 2 minutes, 2 families were torn apart. The police issued a notice to assist in the urgent capture of Fuji Li. They launched a thorough search, checking all possible hiding places, including those of his relatives, friends, and business partners. They also called on villagers to provide any clues. However, despite several days of efforts, they found no leads. The police suspected that Fuji Li had likely fled to another region. Just as they were preparing to deploy forces to search for him, something shocking happened. Fuji Li quietly returned to the village and set fire to the homes of Li and Wu families. He even stood on the wall, shouting, "I came back today to take your lives." Before fleeing again, he threatened to kill all the villagers he had grudges against. Poor Li and Wu families had just gone through the pain of losing their loved ones. Now, they had to face death threats from their enemy. Terrified, both families moved away overnight and never dared to return. Upon hearing the news, the villagers were terrified. Everyone who had ever had a conflict with Fuji Li moved away to other places. Fuji Li's ruthless actions had turned the entire village into a desolate place.
说直白了就是公然跟警察叫嚣挑衅。
The task force received another report. In Zhuanhua City, less than 100 kilometers from Sonha City, a motorcyclist was brutally robbed and attacked. The assailant pretended to hire his services, then struck him on the head with a brick from behind. Not only did the attacker steal his motorcycle, but also the last 50 yuan in his pocket. Fortunately, the motorcyclist's life was not in danger. The police immediately showed him a photo of Fuji Li, and he confidently identified her as the perpetrator. The murders, arson, and robberies all pointed to one thing. Fuji Li was no longer concerned about the consequences. He seemed determined to continue down a path of crime with no turning back. At the time, it was clear that he wasn't thinking about the repercussions at all. His actions left the entire city of Sonha in a state of fear and panic. But where exactly had he gone? The police conducted thorough searches across the entire city of Sonha and even intensified their efforts several times. The manhunt wasn't limited to Hebei province. It extended to northeast China, North China, and even other parts of the country. Whenever there was the slightest clue, the police would rush to follow it, only to be disappointed each time. It was as if Fuji Li had vanished into thin air. Over the years, capturing Fuji Li became a routine task for new recruits in the Sonha police force. Whenever they came across files on other criminals, they would always ask if anyone knew of Fuji. 7 years after the crime, a fraudster named Jia, seeking to atone for his crimes, provided the police with a crucial lead. He insisted that he knew Fuji Li and claimed that Fuji Li had fled to Chongqing long ago. There, he was living with a local woman, and the two had even opened a grain store together. After verifying the woman's address and phone number, the Mikawa police confirmed her existence. This discovery thrilled the two officers on the Special Task Force. After years of effort, they had finally found a lead on Fuji Li's whereabouts. The two officers, armed and ready, rushed to Chongqing. With the help of the local police, they found the woman. However, she claimed she didn't know anyone named Fuji Li. The man she had been in a relationship with and living with was actually a man surnamed Jia. It turned out that Jia had fabricated the story to reduce his sentence, falsely attributing his own experiences to Fuji Li. The case once again hit a dead end. As the eve of the 2009 Spring Festival approached, the two officers, following their usual practice, visited the victims' families to offer their condolences. 11 years had passed since the incident, and there had been no progress in the capture efforts. Although the families understood that the police had done their best, the sight of their tearful eyes always pained the two officers deeply. After leaving, the two officers decided to visit Fuji Li's home, hoping to speak with his wife, Wang Qing. However, upon arriving at the house, they were stunned by what they saw. The newly renovated outer wall of the Fuji residence stood a full 4 meters high. In stark contrast to the neighboring houses, the officers tried to observe the interior from outside, only to discover another wall inside the courtyard, making it impossible for outsiders to see what was going on inside. Could it be that Fuji Li was being hidden by his wife at home? Wang Qing explained that she had built the outer wall so high out of fear of retaliation. As the officers entered the courtyard, they were surprised to find that Wang Qing had a Tibetan Mastiff weighing over 100 pounds. Whether it was the exterior walls or the Tibetan Mastiffs, the Tang household exuded an eerie atmosphere. With permission from their superiors, the police conducted a thorough search of the Tang residence. Despite their efforts, the police search proved fruitless. They turned the Fuji household upside down, but found no trace of Fuji Li. Not only was the man himself nowhere to be found, but there was also no evidence of his recent presence. This attempt to capture him ended in yet another failure. By 2011, 13 years had passed since the incident. Fuji Ritsu's son got married, according to local customs. Even though Wang Qing had already bought his son a house in the city, the wedding should have been grandly held in their old home. However, not only did the Fuji family not host the wedding banquet at the old house, but the newlyweds didn't even stay there for a single day. Even when his daughter came home for holidays, Wang Qing would send her to stay at her brother's place in the city, never allowing her to return to the old house. Strangely enough, even during the cold winter months, Wang Qing never stayed in the city house with central heating. He would only visit his son's home briefly, and then, even if it meant walking back overnight, he would return to the old house. It seemed as if there was some treasure hidden in the old house that Wang Qing was determined to protect. The police officers shared their thoughts with the chief, who fully agreed with them. However, the last search yielded no results. This time, without more solid evidence, they feared another failure. Suddenly, the officers remembered the place where Wang Qing often disposed of his trash. After a thorough search, they found cigarette butts and broken beer bottles that Wang Qing had deliberately buried. According to the investigation, Wang Qing did not have the habit of smoking or drinking, so why were these items in his trash? This indicated that there was a man hiding in Wang Qing's house, and this man was most likely Fuji Li. In the early hours of November 29, 2011, the police raided Fuji Li's home.
同志们，有没有信心？
The SWAT team scaled the wall and entered the courtyard, where their military dogs quickly subdued the Tibetan Mastiff. Suddenly, a noise came from the west room. It turned out that Wang Qing had thrown himself in front of the SWAT officers, trying to block their way. The police quickly restrained him and moved his bed aside. Sure enough, they uncovered a loose floorboard. They suspected there might be a cellar beneath it. As soon as they lifted the board, gunshots rang out from below, just as they had feared. Fuji Li was hiding down there. Since the police had no idea what was waiting for them below, and Fuji Li was armed, they hesitated to enter the cellar right away. Fuji Li was well aware of the consequences of being captured, so he chose to resist fiercely, refusing to come out of the cellar. He declared that he had no way out and was prepared to go down fighting if necessary. The police began a psychological tactic, calling out to Fujili, urging him to think about his wife and child. After more than an hour of standoff, Fujili decided to surrender. He was eventually executed, and his wife, Wang Qing, was arrested and imprisoned for harboring him. The police were finally able to bring justice to the victims' families.